All right, so thank you to the Hamilton Naturalist Club for having me today. I'll talk to you about some aquatic invasive species that we're on the lookout for in the Great Lakes and that we're controlling as well in the Great Lakes. And Fisheries and Oceans Canada takes these threats very seriously, and we work really hard to respond quickly and effectively. But each Canadian, especially those of us who enjoy being out and on the water, can play a role in a lending hand in keeping an eye out and learning how to ID and report these species and harmful invaders. So, what are aquatic invasive species? They're species that are introduced into a new aquatic ecosystem that they aren't native to, and that they have or could have harmful impacts to that ecosystem, or negatively impact the ways in which humans use those ecosystems. And this slide is a bit old, so the numbers are probably a bit higher than this, but the number of aquatic invasive species, or AIS for short, has been increasing almost exponentially since 1830 in Canada. And in the Great Lakes, or in Ontario, there's over 184 aquatic invasive species, and that kind of makes the Great Lakes Basin a hotspot for non-native species in Canada. Right, so today there are too many, as I said, 184, there are too many invasive species to talk about all in one night. So I'm going to focus on these four species and groups of species. So I'll go over Asian carps, sea lamprey, tench, marbled crayfish, and goldfish. And I will note that Asian carp and sea lamprey are the only species or groups of species that have dedicated programs at DFO for either their prevention for Asian carps and control for sea lamprey. So the four potentially most destructive species to Canadian waters are four species that we collectively refer to as Asian carps. And that includes big head carp, silver carp, black carp, and grass carp. And these four species grow to very similar massive sizes, with black carp being the largest. It can get up to 200 pounds and over 2 meters in length. So it is unfortunate that none of them have actually established populations in Canadian waters. We're just keeping a lookout, and only 32 grass carp have been caught in Canadian waters since the program started, since the Asian carp program started in 2012. And you may be wondering, how did they get here? So they originate from river systems in China and in Russia, and those climate systems are very similar to those that we have here in Canada. And that's why they were able, or in North America, so that's why they were able to survive and thrive here and spread as far as they have. They were introduced in the 1960s and 70s in the southern US as a method to control, as a biological control method in aquaculture facilities. Because they all eat different things, so they target different parts of the food web. Big head carp eat zooplankton, silver carp eat phytoplankton, black carp eat snails and mussels, and grass carp eat aquatic vegetation. So they were introduced, and of course, due to flooding, they were able to escape those aquaculture ponds and make their way to the Mississippi River Basin, where they've been able to spread throughout the Mississippi River Basin because they don't have any natural predators in North America because they get to such large sizes. And you can see on the map here, the orange triangles show the grass carp, and their invasion front is the closest to the Great Lakes, and it's you can tell that we have had some capture in the Canadian waters, whereas black carp is the pink pentagons, and they have the furthest invasion front from Canadian waters in the Great Lakes. So why should we care? Asian carps are highly adaptable species. They're capable of dominating habitats and outcompeting native fishes for resources in all stages of their lives. They have voracious appetites. They're really eating machines. Silver carp and big head carp are filter feeders, so they're eating almost constantly all the time. And so they would take up all the food that our native fishes need. They're also very prolific breeders, with females capable of producing over 1 million eggs per spawning season, and in turn, thousands of offspring. So when you consider both their feeding and their breeding habits, they would be able to absolutely dominate our habitats. And in some US rivers where they've established populations, they make up as much as 80% of the biomass. and they outnumber native fishes 10-1, really rendering those ecosystems very fragile. In the video here on the screen, that's a video of silver carp. They're known to jump out of the water when they're startled by either sound or movement. And they can jump up to 3 feet in the air, and they can hit people in boats or on the water or near the water. And they actually, interestingly enough, they don't do this in their native range. They've adopted to do this in their invaded range. And it's very dangerous and undesirable. Okay, here's a short few-minute video about different perspectives from different people and how the Asian carp invasion would impact their lives.
Canada's Great Lakes are under threat from dangerous invaders.
My name is Terry Reese. I'm the executive director of the Federation of Ontario Aquatic Invasive. One of the top issues for our members is the introduction of invasive species, and Asian carp is public enemy number 1. People need to understand that these 4 species that completely disrupt their experience of the water is going to be now.
I'm Tim Purdy. I'm a commercial fisherman. I've been fishing the waters of Lake Huron for 118 years. I truly believe if the Asian carp come into the Great Lakes, commercial fishing will be dead in 3 years. My name is Francis Valley. I'm from Amos, Business. I've been working as a commercial fisherman all my life. My father is a fisherman. His father is a fisherman. Every time I go and see a fish come up, I get the same charge I got the first time. We don't have for fish. That's not only for me, but for my children. They're part of our culture.
My name is Adrienne Bartlett, and I love sport fishing. I spend a lot of time on the water with my family and with my friends, and it's a bonding experience for us. Asian carp really scares me. I've seen videos of them jumping into boats. They're going to injure people. It's very sobering to think that that could happen. It would affect the whole ecosystem. They're voracious eaters, and the whole food web would collapse.
The introduction of these fish is going to be a mess. Get boats, get fish, get swimming, get form. I would love you as a kid to be able to enjoy these waterfronts, and I want my kids and grandkids to be able to experience it.
Is that loud enough for everyone? Because we do have another video. I just want to make sure that the audio is good. We'll put that up. I don't know. We'll stop for the next one. I think
It's the laptop.
So, as I mentioned, grass carp are the most immediate threat to Canadian waters just because their invasion front is so close to the Great Lakes. And they can grow to be up to 1.4 meters in length. And they can gain 2 pounds per month. And the fish here on the bottom, you can see is a grass carp at just a year old. And the fish on the top is only a year later. So you can see just how fast it grows in just a year. And that's why it outgrows the mouth size of native fishes. And it doesn't have any natural predators in our waters. They're also, as I mentioned, prolific breeders, and they can eat up to 40% of their body weight in aquatic vegetation every single day. So if a grass carp gets to be about 100 pounds, it can eat 40 pounds of aquatic vegetation every single day. Each fish can. So they would be able to absolutely decimate our wetlands. And in turn produce huge amounts of waste because they can't digest all of the aquatic vegetation that they eat. So due to their eating and breeding habits, only 20 grass carp, 10 males and 10 females, would be able to dominate and take over the Great Lakes. This right here shows a healthy and balanced ecosystem. And you can see as grass carp begin to enter the ecosystem, it becomes a lot more degraded. And that's because they impact the water quality due to the amount of waste. They can create algal blooms that impact and pose a threat to human health and safety. And then and the increased murkiness of the water makes it difficult for native fishes to find cover from predators and for native juvenile fish to find food. And it reduces spawning habitat for native fishes as well. And so we'll just go back to that one. And it really shows how it can take a perfectly healthy ecosystem and degrade it by removing all of the vegetation. And this not only affects fish species, but it also affects amphibians and mammals and bird species, especially that use these wetlands as refuge in nesting areas. Here's another short clip, how to ID grass carp, comparing it to a common lookalike common carp. And we also, after the presentation, we do have some rubber carps on the table outside. So you can take a look at those as well.
Grass carp are often confused with common carp.
So this is a juvenile grass carp, approximately 30 centimeters in length. They do reach up to 1.5 meters in length. And while this guy is under a pound in weight, they do reach up to 90 pounds. Grass carp has a terminal mouth, which means it can spread at the end of the head, not facing down, not facing up, so it's spread out the end. This fish does not have any bubbles at the side of the mouth. The scales have a darkening on the back of the scale, which actually creates kind of a cross-hatch pattern on the side of the fish. Now, when most people observe these fish, they're going to see them from above. And now we distinguish between the common carp and the grass carp. So the common carp, the dorsal fin would start approximately right from this here and run back to here, where it's much shorter with the grass carp. So the grass carp has a short dorsal fin, common carp has a long one. And that's the easiest way to really tell them apart when they're alive. Our team takes every report seriously and we act upon it. We have a chance to make a difference here. There's only a few fish out there. And we want to get them early and get them out of the system. So 100% visor in the water really helps this effort.
Let's turn it up if we can, because it's not either.
I can't, I think it's at the max volume, both on the computer and on the projector, I'm sorry.
Thanks for that.
So given the high risk that Asian carp pose for the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes, Fisheries and Oceans Canada introduced the Asian carp program in May of 2012. And it's a multidisciplinary program that with the goal to protect the integrity of the Great Lakes and prevent the arrival and establishment and spread of all 4 species of Asian carp. And DFO works very closely with our provincial partners at MNRF and with our US partners in the States. We all want to keep them out of the Great Lakes, and also because we share a joint responsibility with the province when it comes to aquatic invasive species in Ontario. This right here is an invasion curve, and you can see its time and cost. So it costs a lot less money to prevent an invasion from occurring and species from being introduced into our aquatic ecosystems versus if we don't take any action, we let it establish populations, we'll have to get to the point on the other end of the graph where we're managing impact, and that costs a lot more money and a lot more effort. And so for Asian carp, we're really in the prevention phase right now, and we want to keep it that way. We don't want to get to a point where we're managing the species and having to control it. An example that I'll talk about in just a bit is sea lamprey. With sea lamprey, we're really on the other end where we're managing their impacts because they've established populations in Canadian waters. So in order to monitor for their arrival and spread early on, the Asian carp program has an early detection field program. And every year from May to November, we have crews that go out into the Great Lakes to survey our waters. And this serves 2 goals. The first is to target high-risk areas to detect and remove grass carp early, as well as collecting a baseline fish community so that we know what the fish community looks like before Asian carps are introduced, that if they do come into our waters, we know what the community looks like without them and we can properly assess their impact. So since there are no established populations of grass carp in Canadian waters, and we've only caught 32 in the past 10 years, you can imagine that we rarely find them and only in small numbers. And that's like searching for a needle in a haystack. So to orient our search efforts, this map here shows the early detection surveillance sites that are generally sampled every year. And they are across Lakes Ontario, Huron, and Erie, and Superior. And at these sites, we're electrofishing and setting nets in the mouths of rivers, slightly up the river, and in nearshore areas. And these sites are based on modeling of tributaries that have suitable spawning habitat for Asian carps. And we use a variety of sampling gear. So these are all pictures of our field crews out in the field. We have hook nets and bike nets, trap nets, and bag seams. And we also have gill and trammel nets, and we do boat electrofishing to shock the fish and catch them. And the bongo nets and light traps, we do larval assessments. So we have a biologist that goes out and she checks to see if there are any larval grass carp and that would give us a sign that they might be reproducing. What do we do if a grass carp is caught? Well, we respond, and that means that we take immediate action to help reduce or eliminate the threat. And that can take different forms based on the level of threat. And a higher threat would involve more action on the water. And we work effectively with our US partners and with MNRF to respond quickly and effectively. And then the types of analysis that we do, the first thing that we do when we have the fish in our lab is we check for fertility. And the reason that we do this is that in some states, it's still legal to carry fertile grass carp, whereas in other states, they carry them and they have to be sterile. But the sterilization process isn't always 100%. It's hard to check for that. So these fish can then, if there's flooding, they can make their way through the river system and come to the Great Lakes. A fertile grass carp can pose a much higher threat because it can reproduce and lead to established populations in Canadian waters, whereas a sterile fish might not be as much of a threat because it can cause damage over its lifetime, but not really beyond that. And that really helps us determine the next steps and how to respond. So this video clip here is from one of our biologists, and she'll talk about the analysis that we do.
We'll be posting these later too.
Is really the command center for responding to detections of Asian carps in the Great Lakes. And all of the information we collect on these fish is done in this lab here. My name is Julia Colm. I'm an aquatic biologist with Fisheries Fisheries Canada's Asian carp program. My main role is conducting fertility testing on specimens and then doing full dissection to get as much information from every individual as we can to help better understand where these fish are coming from. Asian carp pose a huge threat to our Great Lakes ecosystems. They can reproduce really quickly multiple times per year. They produce a huge number of eggs at any given time. And the very first thing that happens when one is captured is it comes back to the lab and we do fertility testing. And if it is fertile, we're going to follow up with operations on the water. We want to detect them early and remove them quickly to prevent the species from having the chance to reproduce and establish a population. I feel a lot of pride knowing that I'm part of a team that's protecting not only the Great Lakes, but the inland waters beyond as well.
So, as I mentioned, only 32 grass carp have been caught in Canadian waters since the program started surveillance in 2013. And those fish have come from a variety of different sources. They've either come from commercial fishermen, recreational anglers, or from our early detection surveillance efforts. And although 3 grass carp were caught in Canadian waters in 2023, to give you a sense of just how rare they are, there were no captures in 2022 or 2021. The last one before this past summer was in the summer of 2020. We caught one in July through our early detection surveillance efforts. And I'll talk a bit more about the captures that we had this year. So the burgundy marker on the bottom of the screen there, that was our first capture on June 20th, and that was captured by DFO staff conducting early detection surveillance in the Grand River. That one was a sterile male, so we didn't conduct any on the water operations. We reached out to our partners and we put out notifications to let people in the area know to keep an eye out for grass carp in case they came across any. And then the purple marker on the top was our second capture of the year, and that was caught on July 4th by commercial fishermen in the Bay of Quinte. And it was a fertile female, so that's a bit more of a higher risk. So we sent out 2 DFO crews and 1 MNRF crew to sample a variety of locations in the area, and they sampled from July 10th to the 14th, and they conducted about 33 hours of electrofishing, and that's when they had felt that they had sufficiently surveyed the area, and they did not find any more grass carp, so the threat was deemed to be eliminated. And the last one was caught as the orange one at the bottom there, and that was caught on August 16th by a recreational fisherman in the Niagara River near Fort Erie. It was sterile and the sex is to be determined. We've sent it off for testing, but because it was sterile, we didn't conduct any on the water operations. We just did outreach and let people in the area know to keep an eye out for grass carp. So the red triangles on the screen denote high alert areas where grass carp have either been caught or spotted or have a really high likelihood to be caught or spotted. So if you're ever out on the water in these areas, we ask you to keep an eye out, but it is important to note that they really can be anywhere in the Great Lakes and our tributaries. So if you're out in the water, keep an eye out, remember how to ID them, and I'll tell you how to report them in just a second. So if you think you've caught a grass carp, keep the fish, don't throw it back in the water. We ask that you keep the fish and try and take a picture and note the exact location. And you can call the invasive species hotline, the number is on the screen, or you can go to edmaps.org and they'll help you go through the ID just to make sure that what you have is actually a grass carp. And then once it's been confirmed, if you can keep the fish on ice with its head above ice, and that's just because we learn a lot from the head, so we don't want the head to be damaged. We want to be able to do all the analysis on it, and the DFO will arrange to come pick it up. Okay, and that's it for the Asian carp stuff. I'll move on to this sea lamprey. Very much nightmare people. So as I mentioned in the beginning, just like Asian carps, sea lamprey have a dedicated program for their control at DFO, and that's the Sea Lamprey Control Program based out of Sault Ste. Marie. And sea lamprey, they're native to the East Coast in the Atlantic Ocean, all the way down to southern North America and Florida, and out to the Mediterranean Sea and North Africa. They were first observed in Lake Ontario in 1835, but because of Niagara Falls and its impassability, they weren't able to spread any further until the construction and subsequent improvement of the Welland Canal. And by 1921, they had invaded Lake Erie, and soon after that, they were able to invade and quickly spread to the remaining of the Great Lakes. In their native range, they actually spend a part of their life in saltwater, but they have fully adapted to living entirely in freshwater in their invaded range of the Great Lakes. As adults, they spawn in rivers and streams. Their larvae live on organic matter at the bottom of the streams, and they can stay as larvae in sediment for from 3 to 10 years. And then once they're ready, they transform into parasites, and they can migrate into lakes. And that's when they become adults, and they spend 12 to 20 months feeding on the blood of other lake-dwelling fish until they're ready to travel upstream and reproduce and spawn. And then they die shortly after that. So their entire life cycle can take anywhere from 5 to 9 years. Sea lamprey's preferred prey is lake trout. However, very few fish species are immune to their attacks, including whitefish, ciscos, and lake sturgeon. So this slide illustrates the impact that sea lamprey had on the Great Lakes ecosystem, using lake trout as an example. You can see the different lines, each denote a different Great Lake. And lake trout are species that are valued both commercially and recreationally, and the total commercial catch from 1900 to 1960 is shown on the screen. And lake trout were already subject to a lot of pressure due to degraded habitat. And you can think of sea lamprey as being the final straw in what caused such a great reduction in their populations. And their harvest went from tons of fish in 1900 to almost like hundreds of pounds of fish in 1950, 1960. And yeah, sea lamprey was first observed in the 1920s. And they were almost basically extirpated from Lake Michigan because of sea lamprey. There are 5 main sections of the sea lamprey control program, and they're all aimed at safely and effectively controlling sea lamprey populations throughout the Great Lakes Basin. And the first section is the lampricide application, and that's the use of selective lampreys is the primary way that sea lamprey are controlled in the Great Lakes. And it's applied to tributaries that harbor sea lamprey larvae. And lampricides can remove multiple age classes of sea lamprey with one treatment and reduce sea lamprey abundance to about 95%, by about 95%. There's also a barrier program, that's the other mainstay of the sea lamprey control program, and it's the construction and maintenance of barriers for adult sea lamprey migration. And by limiting their ability to migrate to infest new streams, we can reduce the amount of streams that we need to apply lampricide to, while also removing adult sea lamprey before they have the chance to migrate up and spawn. There's also the environmental program, and that program is responsible for evaluating the effects that sea lamprey control has, from the impacts that a barrier may have on other migratory fish to the potential overlap between species at risk and sea lamprey. And we also have the larval assessment section, and that program samples hundreds of streams each year to help target effective sea lamprey control. So to effectively use lampricides, we need to know what streams they use, when they require treatment, and then evaluate how to effectively control populations. And then the primary measure of program success is how many sea lamprey return to spawn in streams each year. So the adult assessment program operates traps in specific tributaries to gather this information, as well as being able to pass other migratory fish at barriers that would otherwise be impassable. So lampricide application is actually border blind, and that means that the methods used to schedule an application don't follow or don't take into account Canadian and US waters, only that it's the most effective treatment that can be applied among all potential candidates. And we actually, the sea lamprey control program helps with lampricide application in Lake Michigan, because it's very complex river systems in Lake Michigan, and we also help in New York as well. And lampricide application is deployed following consultation and concurrence with provincial, state, tribal, and First Nation communities throughout the entire basin. Overall, the sea lamprey control is to limit the number of streams that are infested with sea lamprey, and in those streams that are infested, to kill as many as sea lamprey as possible before they become parasitic juveniles and migrate to prey on species in the Great Lakes. So some streams can harbor many thousands and even millions of sea lamprey larvae. And this picture here is in Garland River, Lake Huron. And they kind of look like weeds, but yeah, they kind of look like grass. But each one of these lamprey that would have survived to adulthood and returned to a river to spawn, they represent 18 kilos of fish production that would have been lost to a single sea lamprey. And there's loss, maybe millions in there. All right, so I'll move on to the last three species for tonight. The first one is Tench. I'll start off with their key ID features. So you can see that they have a thick hollow peduncle, and that's just, over here, that's just this part right here, right by their tail. And that's thicker than most native species. And they are an average length between 20 and 40 centimeters. Their body is covered with really small scales, and they have slimy skin almost. Their fins are rounded, and they don't have any spines in their fins either. And their coloring is on their back is olive green or black, and they have gold sides and a white yellowish belly. This species is native to Europe and Asia, and it was introduced in some ponds in Quebec in 1986. And in 1991, they escaped those ponds due to heavy flooding again, and they ended up in the Richelieu River, and that's the purple marker on the screen. And then from there, they were able to spread to different bodies of water across Quebec and establish populations. And the population of most concern to Ontario is the marker in Burgundy, and that's in Lake St. Francis in Quebec. And it's most concerned because it's really close to Cornwall in the pathway to the Great Lakes. And there was actually just a singular tench that was found in the Ottawa River near Castleman, and both MNRF and the Quebec Provincial Ministry of the Environment are both monitoring in that area to see if they are finding more, and in Quebec they're monitoring in Lake St. Francis and across the province as well. Due to its high fecundity and its ability to tolerate really harsh conditions, Tench is a very effective invader. They can compete with native species for food in space, and they favor snails and insect larvae and crustaceans. And they compete very often with species like minnows, white sucker, bullhead, and yellow perch. And it frequents the same habitat as many of the native species. In Quebec, they're very concerned for the copper red horse. It's an endangered species that's only found in the St. Lawrence River and a few other rivers in southwestern Quebec. And they can also act as ecosystem engineers in habitats because it finds food by directly or indirectly altering the water quality. In search of snails, they stir up sediments, and that makes the water turbid. And also by consuming herbivorous snails, the tench indirectly increases the amount of algae that's in the water. And because that algae then consumes dissolved oxygen as it decomposes, that makes the habitat uninhabitable for native species, almost like algal blooms. And they can also carry parasites that native species aren't accustomed to, putting them at a higher risk. So both provincial and federal programs in Quebec are working on managing tench populations and understanding their impacts on our ecosystems. They're being monitored for their spread into other bodies of water, and research is being done to understand their behaviors and population dynamics. And our AIS program in Ontario expanded this summer to include surveillance for tench in the St. Lawrence River near Cornwall. And as this is suspected to be the most likely entry into Ontario in the Great Lakes. And our crew uses traditional sampling methods just like those that we use for grass carp in the Great Lakes. And we also have a tench working group where we work with US partners and Quebec partners in order to share information and eDNA results and any new findings about how the species is spreading and any behaviors that they observe. And we also work with the states because they've established populations on the west coast of the US. And so they also really want to keep them out of the Great Lakes. And the next species is an interesting one. It's marbled crayfish. They can be identified by their marbling pattern on a green to brown carapace. They also have really small claws in comparison to native species and in relation to their own bodies. And they lack distinct notches on their claws that most native species have. And they're also really small. They only measure about 4 to 7 centimeters in length total. So the species was likely introduced in Ontario via the pet trade because it reproduces asexually. It just clones itself. There's only females out there. So it's highly sought after to feed aquarium pets. If you have a really big aquarium pet and it eats a lot, this is like an easy, people find it as an easy way to feed. So it was first detected in October of 2021 in a stormwater pond in Burlington. And pictures were posted on iNaturalist, and they came to the attention of Dr. Premick Hammer, and he's a crayfish expert. So he then reached out to the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, also known as OFAH. But given the time of year, it was really late, and they didn't feel like they could begin investigating them. So they began their investigation in 2022. And he notified OFAH because they're the organization that actually hosts the invading species hotline, and they have some capacity to also monitor and help out with that. And they know which organizations to notify when an AIS is caught. So in May 2022, the OFAH went back to the ponds in the area, and they were able to confirm that it was indeed marbled crayfish that was posted on iNaturalist. They then sampled using various techniques like eDNA and picket sweeps, as well as passive baited traps. And the eDNA results came back with really weak positive detections. So they went back at the end of the season, and those detections were a bit higher, or stronger detections. And then so in the winter of 2022 and 2023, to manage this, the city of Burlington drained the ponds so that the marbled crayfish could hopefully be frozen over in their burrows and that they wouldn't come back the next season. And they also added fine mesh wiring to the outflow of the pond to minimize the potential for crayfish migration to other ponds. And then in July 2023, the eDNA work was handed off to Conservation Halton. And on July 5th, a marbled crayfish was caught. And then within a few weeks, 8 more were caught. And then DFO and MNRF went back with OCH in October, and we caught 25 more marbled crayfish. So they would negatively impact our ecosystems by competing with native crayfish for food and shelter. And because they reproduce asexually and can create really big populations, they would impact biodiversity and really alter our food webs. And they would likely eat a lot of native invertebrates and macrophytes, leaving no food for our native species. There's also a concern, as they've been seen to be harmful to native species of crayfish in Europe as well. As for next steps, the city of Burlington is hoping to drain the ponds again this year in hopes that they will freeze over in their burrows. And they're trying to do it at the best time now, so that like they do it when it's the coldest. MNRF is really the lead for this species, so we as DFO we take a supporting role and help where we can. So MNRF and Conservation Halton will continue to do eDNA sampling and surveying the ponds next year. Some signage was also put up asking people not to release pets and invasive species into the ponds to hopefully prevent any new introductions. And a number of organizations, including us, will work to do outreach in communities to raise awareness about the danger of releasing pets into our ecosystems and asking people to report any marbled crayfish sightings that they may see. All right, and the final species is everyone's favorite pet fish, the goldfish. So they're typically between 13 and 25 centimeters, but they can get up to be 50 centimeters long. And I've seen some really big pictures of goldfish, or pictures of really big goldfish. And they tend to have smaller mouths with no barbels at the corners of their mouths. And they have a forked tail fin. And they have a dorsal fin that takes up about 2/3 of their body. And their color may vary from gold to olive green in wild populations, and I've even seen some very silvery looking goldfish as well. And they're known to hybridize with common carp. And when they do, their offspring, it's really hard to tell a goldfish from a hybrid. And the hybrids have one set of barbels at the side of their mouths. Common carp have 2 sets, and goldfish don't have any, so that's kind of the way that you can tell all 3 of them apart. Goldfish were most likely introduced via intentional pet release in the commercial bait fish trade. We love this species in our ornamental ponds and aquariums, and people have let them out to be free in our aquatic ecosystems and natural waterways. And this led to the growth of goldfish populations in Canadian waters. And it is very likely that the goldfish populations are a lot higher than what we know, and because they're able to reproduce, survive, and thrive here. And this species is omnivorous. So they feed on a variety of algae and zooplankton, phytoplankton, fish eggs, and larvae. It's also a potential predator for small juvenile fish. And the manner in which they feed is very similar to that of common carp. So it reduces water clarity as they stir up silt to dig up rooted vegetation. And this prevents, and that suspends sediment, and that reduces plant growth. It increases the mortality of eggs because fish sometimes they lay their eggs on the aquatic vegetation and the larvae of other aquatic organisms. And they're also known to be a vector for disease. And that would impact our native fish populations. And when goldfish are in very large numbers, they can increase water turbidity and promote the production of cyanobacteria, and that could alter the water quality by creating algal blooms and possibly causing the need for restoration, which costs a lot of money. All right, and I have this plug-in from our partnerships team at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. They support the delivery of the department's mandate, and it's one way that they do this is by facilitating outreach and engagement activities. The team provides quarterly high-level information sessions on DFO's legislation and conducting projects near water. And the next sessions are being planned, and it's tentative for January 25th, 2024, and the following one after that will be in May. But if you're part of an organization or a group that is looking for a more detailed session on a particular topic, like the request for review form, the authorization process, or the Species at Risk Act, this team would work with you to set up an online information session. The team also delivers regional sessions to engage with partners and stakeholders on the development of new legislation, policies, and tools to support the implementation of our mandate. So if you'd like to be added to the distribution list for any engagement or outreach sessions, you can contact the email address on the slide. And if you happen to miss it and you want it, you can come and ask me after the presentation is over.
Love our bilingual acronym emails.
Oh yeah, they're so. All right, so I'll end the presentation here with a quick reminder on how to ID grass carp. So as it was mentioned in the video, they have a really short dorsal fin. They don't have barbels at the side of their mouths, and their eyes are really level with their mouths. And if you think you've caught one, report it to the invading species hotline. There's a picture on the screen of kind of how you would place the fish on ice and wrap its head with paper towels just to keep the head safe. And that also goes for any invasive species. If you're out in the water, you catch something, you don't know what it is, and you can't figure it out, it doesn't hurt to call the invading species hotline, and they'll work with you to make sure that we have this either native species, and if it is invasive, that you know what to do. And if you're looking for more information, you can visit DFO's Aquatic Invasive Species web pages or the Asian Carp Canada website. And if you have any more specific questions, you can find me afterwards or shoot me an email. And I think we can open up for questions now. Thank you guys for very good.
So you must have done a lot of work to increase awareness,
Mhm, mhm.
presence, and how to identify and et cetera.
Yeah, so we have been working to do outreach since the program started in 2013, and we get out to a lot of events. We work with a variety of partners. So we work with the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. We work with the Invading Species Center. So all of these partners really help us raise awareness and let people know how to ID them and what to do if they think they've caught one. And I think that really allows us to reach those really important audiences like recreational fishers, who are really our eyes in the water. We can't always go in the water, but if we have the help of everyone, we can really prevent any invaders from coming in. Thank you. Yeah. Good.
Electric barriers used to control the one.
To control lamprey, I'm not sure if they are. I'll be honest, I worked with the Asian carp program for a while, so I'm not really familiar with the sea lamprey control program. But I can figure that out and let you know if you want to send. I can share my email with you. Thank you for your question. Yeah, back here.
The carp, the RBG tries to keep out of the lovely barrier. Which kind is that?
That one's common carp. Common carp is an invasive species, but it was introduced so long ago that they've been able to establish populations. So that's the carp that you most often see, and that's why we often get people confusing grass carp or any of the Asian carp for common carp.
The other Asian carps?
They do cause a lot of damage. They stir up the sediment from the bottom of the rivers and streams. But they've been around for so long that it's kind of hard to control for their populations. But yeah, they do cause damage. They're not an ideal species to have around maybe. Thank you. Yeah.
Presumably the grass carp has been around for many years. Is it not controlled there at all? How does it just control itself?
So they're actually in Asia and in Russia, that's their native range. So there are bigger fish out there that naturally control their populations. So they don't cause as much harm because that's where they're from, and that's the ecosystems that they like to be in, and that can support the amount that they eat and things like that, and the amount that they produce. So they don't really need to control the populations out there. Yes, Lou.
What has been monitoring for the marbled crayfish like in Hamilton since it's so close to Burlington, and have many surveys been done yet?
So the monitoring for marbled crayfish has really been concentrated in Burlington in the stormwater pond that it was found in. Just because they have done surveys around and they haven't found any more. So they're really concentrating on this one pond, and hopefully we're able to control the population that way.
You mentioned the grass carp and thought some of them were sterile.
Mhm.
Why are they sterile?
So in some US states, they're still allowed to be stocked in order to control aquatic vegetation in ponds. It's completely legal to do so. But in some states, they can have them be fertile, whereas in other states, they have to be sterile. So there's a sterilization process that occurs, and that's kind of how they end up, they can swim through and end up in Canadian waters while they're sterile. But sometimes the sterilization process isn't always 100% effective. So some of them get through and they still end up being fertile, even though it's not legal.
Do they tag them when they sterilize them too, just to track?
I don't think they do, not that I'm aware of. Yes, I think.
The one carp that was caught, the witty seemed a bit odd, that there was just one non-sterile female. Do they have a really large range, or would it just be that just popular catching? Why they called off the search for other fish, but it was one.
Yeah, so they did catch one sterile female. It was caught by a commercial fisher, or sorry, it was a fertile female that they caught in the Bay of Plenty. And our field operations lead and our crews really looked at potential habitat and suitable spawning and suitable areas the fish might be in. And that's kind of how they planned where to go sampling for more grass carp, or where to look for more. And after they had sampled for about 4 days, they kind of came to the conclusion they probably wouldn't find any more. And we still ask people, like even when we do on the water operations, we still ask people in the community to keep an eye out. And commercial fishers are really good at that. They're always out on the water fishing. So if they were to catch another one, they would have reported it to us as well. Yeah.
Do you know if there are any like biological control methods from the native range that would affect like all the carps but no other group of fish?
Yeah, so we actually do a lot of research is done by fisheries and ocean science to figure out different types of barriers that would kind of target carp or Asian carp more than any other species, and that's a variety of light barriers and sound barriers. That's still very preliminary research that we're trying to figure out what works
I
best.
was thinking like parasites that have invertebrates that haven't been introduced.
And then that's like you're asking to if that would be able to control them.
Yeah, because like I know that that's often used for invasive plants and insects,
Mhm.
and because it's like we have a bunch of carp that are kind of unrelated to any other native fish.
Mhm.
That might be an option.
Maybe, but I think maybe the concern with that could be that introducing that parasite to the fish in the US, maybe, because we don't have any established population, so we're not there yet. But maybe the concern would be for that parasite to travel from grass carp or whatever Asian carp to another native species that we don't really want it to impact. Yes, Luke?
Can you speak to some of the ways that we can be involved in protecting the Great Lakes in terms of citizen science advocacy to local politicians, donating money, etc.?
Yes, of course. So we work with a variety of partners, as I mentioned. And I think OFAH, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, they do a lot of citizen science. And you could always help out with that. I think they do ask for volunteers, and so does FOCA, the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association. Both are based out of Peterborough, but they do work across the province. And other ways is just really to keep an eye out, learn how to ID invasive species. And when you're out there on the water, if you think you saw something, just to report it. And even if it's a false alarm and it's a native species, you did your part and you tried to alert just in case it wasn't. But yeah, I think working with our partners is maybe the best way to get involved in terms of citizen science.
Just to add on that too, People like Lujanne, they do all the hard work and the science. My job is to get that information to Canadians and let you know of these things. So when we're talking about outreach and stuff like that. But a lot of invasive species control, one of the most important things, like you said earlier too, spreading the word and not the species.
Yeah.
Knowing if you spend a lot of time on the water, knowing how to stop the spread from happening in the first place. That education is one of the most important pieces. So knowing a lot of these things can travel through like ballast water as well too. So if you're not properly cleaning your boats, your canoes, or your kayaks and things like that, not knowing how, you might be inadvertently spreading these species from bodies of water to other areas too. So just being aware and making sure you're taking all those proper precautions to clean things, making sure that water runoff doesn't go right back into the water. There's a lot of different ways you can prevent the spread, and that's the message that we I think push the most with TFO to get people out and be aware, is just to know what not to do, just as what to do as well. So there's a lot of resources available for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't release your pets.
Yeah,
Drain
don't
dry.
flush a goldfish, please. I'm surprised you didn't have a picture of big huge goldfish.
Oh my gosh. Oh my god. I didn't even.
Made paper. It's crazy. It's not for a good reason.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Did you have your hand up, Brian?
Yeah, it's, I'd heard more about rusty crayfish
Mhm.
than I had marble
Mhm.
crayfish. And do you have any sense, I mean, you're more of a grass carp, so yes, but do you have any sense of how the rusty crayfish is evolving in Ontario?
I don't have as much of a sense as I do about marble crayfish. I don't know if Greg, do you know at all?
I know rusty crayfish are pretty widespread. I don't know to what extent. I know there's been established for a while. But they're pretty commonplace, kind of like common carp.
Yeah.
So they're here for that. Less of a concern as than marble crayfish.
Because of Greg Cable, he is my coworker that has come for moral support tonight. All right. That's all. Yeah, thank you. Oh,
And just one question. We have a stormwater pond here, Delsey in Dundas.
mhm,
It had an environmental assessment done by a private company, right, that the city hired, and they missed lily cup mussels in it, which are an endangered species, freshwater species, right? Not Great Lake species, but are all these companies aware of all the types of things to look for when they do these assessments? Because to me, they're often the ones that go in and go, oh, okay, it's fine, boys, you can carry on with your work, don't need to worry about these things. And a lot of stuff gets missed. So to me, these private companies that are, I'm not saying they're not, the people that actually work in them and trying to do a good job, but often the boss says, we've got to get this thing passed quickly. And also, I know each one is assessed by the conservation areas and things like this. And so it is making sure, because a lot of pets get released in the stormwater.
absolutely, yeah.
And to me, they're a huge, we have turtles, right? And turtles are a big thing, red-eared sliders going in. So it's making sure that, everybody's aware of what to look for to me.
That's actually a great consideration to take into account. I think the people that work for environmental assessments are usually biologists, so they should have an idea kind of what to look out for. But yeah, it's a great consideration that I honestly didn't really think of before. So thank you for bringing that one up.
If you ever find yourself at Ripley's Aquarium in Toronto, we unveiled a new exhibit. Well, I guess like last year now. There's a grass carp exhibit on behalf of the DFO that we have. So it's like just an interactive display. You can learn more. So if you're ever at the aquarium, checking it out, look for us, and you can learn more about what we talked about tonight too.
And they also have an exhibit at the Toronto Zoo. They actually have grass carp and big head carp and black carp. They don't have any silver carp because, as I said, silver carp jump to jump, and that wouldn't be appropriate for an aquarium. But yeah, so you can actually head to the zoo as well, and they do have lots of information about Asian carp there too. Very cool to see them in real life.
Mosquito carps. Is that not catfish? No.
Yeah, that's a question back there. They're all introduced, so it's like the Cyprididae family. And they've all, I think most of them do originate from Asia, and Europe, and they've been introduced in Canadian waters.
That's all the questions that we have. We do have some time. We're not gonna get kicked out yet. If you wanna go and you still have all your outreach set up?
Yeah. We have a bunch of outreach materials. We have tote bags. We have coloring books and family booklets.
Lots, too. So come check it out, ask more questions.
Thank you guys.